So as Ricky just said, Pesach Sheni, which it is for me already, and will be, God willing, for all of you tonight. So let's begin our discussion on Pesach Sheni. And I will ask Ethel, would you begin?
Sure.
Thank you. Okay.
A second chance for spiritual progress. Another opportunity granted. Pesach Sheni, the second Pesach, is celebrated on the 14th of Iyar, a month after the eve of Pesach. The Torah relates that in the first year after the Exodus, when the Jewish people were preparing to bring the Pesach sacrifice, there were certain men who were impure. They had come in contact with a human corpse, and they could not bring the Pesach offering on that day. They came before Moishe.
Just to tell you, the three opinions as to why they were impure. So one opinion is they were the ones that carried the remains of Joseph from Egypt. Joseph had promised, made the Jews promise that when they leave Egypt, they will take his remains with him. They had buried him. Egyptians had buried him in an iron coffin in the Nile River. And they, just by the way, so how did they get him up? So by divine command, they cast into the Nile a piece of parchment upon which was written, "Arise, O ox," because Joseph was blessed by his father Jacob on his deathbed. He blessed all his sons, and many of them compared to various creatures, wild creatures and beasts. And Joseph is compared to an ox, strength, and also beautiful horns. It was two animals combined. Anyway, so on the on this parchment was written, "Arise, O ox," and the coffin rose to the surface. They took it and carried it with them. So one view is that these were the people that carried his remains. By the way, the golden calf happened because unscrupulous people got a hold of this sacred parchment and threw it into the molten gold, and there arose the image of the calf. This is not our subject, but what it does point to, I'll just say this much, that all unholiness is a corruption of and rooted in something very holy. On the contrary, the more unholy, the deeper is the source, the deeper is the corruption. At any rate, that's one opinion. So who they were carrying? They were carrying the remains of Joseph. A second opinion is that these were the remaining surviving sons of Aaron that we read last week. He had four sons, and Nadav and Avihu had died. We learned about this last week on the day the Mishkan was inaugurated. And the two brothers, MICHEL and Elza, took them out of the sanctuary where they had expired. So that's another second opinion as to who the impure ones were. The third opinion is a mes mitzvah, someone who died and had no relatives, because this was someone that had joined the ranks of the Jews, not part of the Jewish people, and there was no one to bury them. And these people looked after this deceased, and hence impure. It's obvious that the three opinions are not in conflict. All three are true. So there's a whole group of them that came to Moishe and they said, continue.
They came before Moshe and said, "We are unclean, but why should we be held back from bringing the offering of God in its time?" Moshe said to them, "Stand and hear what God will command concerning you." God said, "If any man be impure or on a distant way on the day of the Pesach offering, he shall sacrifice the Pesach offering to God in the second month on the 14th day at dusk."
So a new law is issued by Hashem, and that is that there's a second offering for anyone that didn't the first time because they were impure, they were tomei, and therefore prevented, or they lived too far, Or actually, our sages say they lived within close range to be in Yerushalayim Erev Pesach, but just didn't bother. Even one intentionally could have and didn't, there is the second Pesach to make amends. Continue.
Anyone, anyone who did not bring a Pesach offering because of impurity or even because he had willfully transgressed God's will was thus given the opportunity to compensate for his shortcoming by bringing an offering on Pesach Sheni.
Good. Okay. So that's the basic story. So, in other words, as we're going to learn in the next paragraph, the story is very strange because we would have expected Moishe Rabbeinu's response to have been this. You did a mitzvah, whether carrying the remains of Yosef or the brothers that had to take out the other brothers that had expired, Aaron's eldest son, or the mitzvah of looking after an individual that died that had no relatives, which is the greatest mitzvah. So you did a good thing. The law is you got to be ritually pure. You're not, for no fault of your own. On the contrary, you were doing something virtuous. So you won't. What's the big complaint? Next year, God willing, should all be well. And you'll have an opportunity next year. That's the natural response. Every law has its parameters. How it's observed, when it's observed, and if the conditions aren't to be met, you can't observe it. And if those conditions can't be met through no fault of your own, then there's no fault of your own. And yet Moshe Rabbeinu says, no, it's a good question and a good complaint. Just by the way, I recently read an extraordinary insight here. These people are actually saying that the person that we were looking after, Yosef or Nadav and Avi, or even this third person, were tzaddikim. And a tzaddik, even in death, does not impart impurity. So why should we be withheld? And Moishe Rabbeinu's response was, you know what, you're right, go ahead and bring it tonight. But since you bring up this question, then we'll have this new law that we just read. But they actually did bring it, which is all out of Pesach. Because a tzaddik, the death of a tzaddik does not engender impurity. The body is pure, even though the soul is no longer manifesting, and still expresses holiness. This is a very incredible idea that it's sourced in the Zohar and in the Talmud. But that's not the simple meaning. The simple meaning is that they were told, in a month from now, you shall bring. What's the basic message? So the basic message is, as we're going to see in the next chapter, it's never too late. So, Peggy, would you read for us? It's never too late.
Sure. The previous Rebbe explained that Pesach Sheni teaches us that nothing is ever lost. It's never too late. Our conduct can always be rectified. Even someone who is impure, who was far away and even desired to be so, can still correct himself. There is no justification for despair. Every individual, no matter what his situation, always has the potential to make a leap forward, the literal translation of the Hebrew word Pesach, in his service of God. Given the significance of Pesach Sheni, one might ask, why was it instituted a full month after Pesach in the month of Iyar? Wouldn't it have been better to atone for our deficiencies at the earliest opportunity, in Nisan?
Yeah, it's a very simple question. Why a month later? A week later, 2 weeks later, give them enough time to undergo. For these people, at the simple level, all they needed was another week at most. At most. Actually, our sages say it was the last day of their purification process. They were 1 day shy. Good, so the next week, 2 weeks later, let's keep it in the month of Nisan, the month of redemption. Why is it postponed for an entire month? Continue.
We can answer this question by comparing the spiritual characteristics of Nisan and Iyar. Nisan is the month of revelation, the month during which God revealed his greatness and redeemed the Jewish people despite their inadequacies. Iyar, by contrast, is the month of individual endeavor, a quality that is exemplified by the mitzvah of Spiro HaOmer. The theme of ER, self-refinement initiated by the individual himself, is in keeping with the nature of Pesach Sheni, the festival in which an individual who was not motivated by Pesach is given an additional opportunity to elevate himself.
Okay, thank you. So what is he saying? He's saying that Nisan and Iyar are contrasting months. Nisan is all about revelation of God to man, from above to below. As we say, read in the Haggadah, and God came down to Egypt, not an angel, not a seraph, not an emissary, I and no other. I came and took you out of Egypt. It was all God's doing, and we allowed ourselves to be led, but not much more than that. But the month of Iyar is unique in the Jewish calendar, that every single day is the mitzvah of the counting of the Omer. We all know what that means. We're not simply marking time, but the counting of the Omer is a process of spiritual self-refinement. Just to refresh your memory, we are commanded to count 7 weeks, 49 days, and day 50 is Shavuot, which commemorates the giving of the Torah. So this count is not simply marking time, but a process of self-refinement, in as much that we all have 7 basic emotions, a reflection of the divine 7 emotions. Each of the emotions are intertwined with the other. There's love within love, there's fear within love, and so on. So 7 times 7 is 49. So we're going through each week, we're addressing another emotion of our emotional makeup, and we are climbing the ladder from below to above in self-refinement. Hence, the answer is, why is Pesach Sheni the second month? Because Pesach Sheni is all about a change of heart. It's all about man saying, no, I want to be part of this, even though I ignored this till now. I want to connect. Since the whole motif and theme is from below to above, it doesn't belong in the month of Nisan, which is the month of miracle and the focus on what God does, but the month of Iyar, which is in the focus of man's effort. Hence, it's in the second month. All right? So that's what he answers here. Let's continue now with further detail. Thank you, Peggy. Okay, Aliza, you haven't read in a while. Pesach and Chametz together.
Okay, thank you. 1 second, I just need to pull it up again. Just 1 second. Okay, so Pesach and Chametz together. The different stages of divine service represented by Pesach Rishon, the first Pesach, and Pesach Sheni are reflected in one of the halach differences between them. On Pesach Rishon, all traces of Chametz must be obliterated. On Pesach Sheni, although we eat matzah, one may have Chametz in one's possession. On Pesach Rishon, hosted aloft by the divinely initiated revelations of the month of Nisan, we strive to reach new heights of spiritual freedom by stepping beyond the limits of our personality. This necessitates leaving behind our chametz, i.e. our egotism. Then comes the month of Iyar with its demand for individual spiritual homework. On Pesach Sheni, accordingly, we concentrate on rectifying and upgrading our current levels of conduct. And since in this kind of avodah, we have to deal with all the current components of our natures. The possession of chametz on Pesach Sheni is permitted.
All right, so what he's answering is, in light of the above, you can understand the difference between the way these two holidays are observed. On the one hand, one is replacing the other. If you didn't observe the first Pesach fully because you didn't bring the offering, you can do so now with Pesach Sheni. And yet, there's a marked difference between the two. On the first Pesach, chametz is entirely and extremely proscribed or forbidden. And in the second Pesach, one may have, although one does eat matzah together with the Paschal lamb, one may also possess and even eat on that day chametz, the spiritual reason. Chametz represents the ego. Now, the first Pesach, we were overwhelmed. It's a revelation from above. And we were privy to that which is beyond us, the miraculous, the transcendent, and hence no chometz. We were lifted beyond the morass of our own limitations. But Pesach Sheni is all about the real work from below. We're dealing with our chometz. We're cleaning it up. We're dealing with our ego, not obliterating it, mind you, but refining it. And hence, chometz is necessarily the ego part of the Pesach Sheni experience, because not being swept away by a divine revelation, by divine redemption, but rather the dogged process of self-refinement. And the starting point is the ego, which is never abandoned. It can't be. That's integral to who we are. Hence, there is chometz. Okay, good. Let's continue now with the next section. Mordechai Spiro, would you like to read?
Rabbi, I'm in my car and I.
Okay, no, don't read. So don't read while you're in your car. Okay, you'll listen. Okay. Okay. MICHEL, Judge Shore, you up to reading?
Yes, Rabbi. The desire within our hearts. In light of this, we can explain why the mitzvah of Pesach Sheni came about in response to the sincere request of individuals who were impure. One of the goals of Judaism is to draw holiness downward, so to speak, into the world. A more important goal, however, is to elevate the world and the worldly aspects of man, to transform all aspects of our being, and bring to the surface the essential godliness within us. The institution of Pesach Sheni was prompted by the heartfelt desires of those who, despite their impurity, protested, why should we be prevented from bringing the offering of God? The mitzvah was given not as a commandment from above, but as an expression of man's inner desire to establish a bond with God. This need exists in potential in every Jewish heart. Man's plea for one more chance reflects the mode of divine service called teshuva, repentance, return. For everyone, even a person who is on a distant path, possesses a divine potential which always seeks to realize itself.
Okay, that's pretty self-explanatory, especially the way you read it. All right, good. So let's go to we'll continue then in our discussion, stepping above time. And I'm going to ask Ricky, please, to read.
The concept of tshuva helps us understand another difference between Pesach Sheni and Pesach Rishon. Pesach Rishon lasts 7 days and 8 in the diaspora. Pesach Sheni is celebrated for only 1 day. A week represents the cycle of change that governs our material world. The spiritual experience of Pesach Rishon requires a full week because it encompasses the entire cycle of growth and change, which must take place within the framework of our worldly existence. The service of tshuva, however, requires us to reach beyond our limited worldly frame of reference and express the unbounded potential of the godly spark within us. This potential, which transcends the restrictions of the natural world, cannot be confined within the limitations of time. The celebration of Pesach Sheni for 1 day symbolizes transcendence. Here, the number 1 is not the smallest number. Instead, it represents a unity which transcends all numerical values. The time-transcending quality of tshuva is exemplified by the Talmudic account of Rabbi Eliezer ben Dordaya. Although he had led a wanton life when he felt compelled to do tshuva, he experienced an internal transformation so intense that his soul departed from his body as he wept in remorse. When Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi heard the story, he too wept, exclaiming, "There are those who attain their share in the world to come after many years of divine service, And there are those who attain their share in the world to come in one moment. Hasidic thought explains that Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi was reacting with a positive form of envy, for he realized that Rabbi Eliezer ben Dodaya's tshuva surpassed his own spiritual heights.
Thank you. Okay, so what he's adding here, as we just heard, is on the one hand, he said in the previous section that Pesach Sheni represents man's effort, whereas Pesach Rishon, the focus is God's redemptive gift, the Exodus, the birth of our people. The paradox is that the first Pesach is 7 days, which is symbolic and expresses the natural order. Pesach Sheni is 1 day. Now, based on what we said in the previous paragraph, you would think it'd be the reverse. If we're talking about from below to above, we still have chometz, we're dealing with chometz, we never escape the ego, then we're bound by time and space. You'd think the opposite, that the second Pesach would be 7 days, this process, consistent with the counting of the Omer, there's a process of gradual refinement. And you would think Pesach Rishon, the first one, which is about divine revelation, that's one blinding, transcendent moment. That would be 1 day. We think the opposite. Pesach Rishon 1 day and Pesach Sheni 7 days, but not so. Pesach Sheni is 1 day, and the reason is because ultimately, the ability to make change in our life has to start with a decision to break out of whatever pattern or boundaries we have been in till now. The process is a lifetime of change, but true teshuvah, like we just read Rabbi Elza about the Daya, true teshuvah is a moment of, can it be epiphany and a dramatic moment of, irrespective of what was till now, doesn't have to continue this way for the next moment. And going forward, I can begin to do this or not do the other. In a word, what I'm saying is teshuvah is radical. And because teshuvah is radical at its core, its expression can be very deliberate and ought to be. But at the core, it's a drive that's radical. At the core, it's the soul crying out beyond limits. I don't want to be left out, no matter what I've done, deliberately or for reasons beyond my control. I want to reconnect. That's radical. Because logic says it's too late. You made your bed, you sleep in it. This is how your life is going to be. You lived 40 years this way, 50 years this way, 60 years this way, 70 years this way. Who are you fooling to change now? That's what logic says. It's too late. Pesach Sheni says not too late. It's radical. It's beyond time in that sense. It says I'm not limited to this because my soul is a part of Hashem who's beyond time. And I'm choosing to connect to that beyond time truth. So the paradox is that Pesach Sheni is 1 day and it's coming from man. And the first Pesach is 7 days and it's the revelation from God because it's a revelation that comes down into and pervades creation. Day 1, 2, 3, 7 day celebration, pervaded, washed as it were with the miracles of the redemption. But Pesach Sheni is man's cry that defies convention, logic, and order in history, personal history, and says we can have change, revolution, the most virtuous revolution, and therefore it's 1 day.
Can I just ask a question? On
Pardon?
on the regular Pesach, even those who were not able to bring a korban Pesach still celebrated the full 7 days. They just missed out on the korban, right? So
Yeah.
this day is just making up for the one part that they weren't able to. I'm not diminishing anything else. I'm just saying maybe one of the reasons why, in addition to, it's not longer because the action of the korban Pesach is not an action that ever took 7 days. It's an instantaneous thing. It's not a prolonged event. I mean, I know it
Right.
signifies.
So that's all.
I know what it's. Yeah. So, no, I was saying I know
But
what it
also
signifies. Yes, sir.
Pardon?
So I know what it signifies in terms of, that instantaneous tshuva. Tshuva only takes a moment, just like the carbon only
That's
takes
right.
a
That's
moment,
right. That's right.
which is why it's
But-
only a moment. But regardless, if Pesach Sheni represents Pesach, but it's not representing the entire holiday, it's representing a particular act
That's
in,
right.
right.
Yeah, it's making up for that one moment. And what that moment is, what is it? It's the tshuva moment. It's the sacrifice, the total devotion. That's what the issue is. And additionally, as you're pointing out, these people would have kept Pesach, impure or otherwise, and they'll bring Pesach Sheni. So what that's saying is that even the tzaddik has to do tshuva. Pesach Sheni is a Yom Tov in the end that everybody benefits from, whether actually observed physically or not, but its message is for everyone. Which is, interestingly, this is the segue to the very next and final part of this discussion. Okay, so Mrs. Z, would you read? Do you have the text? I'm looking at your... Or maybe you just, okay. So anybody wants to read here? Cynthia? Yeah. Do we have someone stepping forward?
Okay, continuous growth.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Although Pesach Sheni was initially instituted for those who had not offered the Pesach sacrifice in its proper time, its spiritual expression in our divine service is relevant to all Jews, even those who have celebrated Pesach as completely as possible. The Pesach sacrifice was intended to motivate every individual to leave his personal Egypt, to make a radical departure from his previous spiritual state and approach a new, higher level of divine service. The departure from Egypt is a continuous process. We must constantly proceed forward, no matter what heights a person has reached. He should not remain content with the level he has attained and must always seek to advance further, for the godly potential within us is infinite. Oh,
Good. Continue.
I think I lost it. Hold on. Sorry. In the month of ER, is that where we are?
Yeah.
In the month of ER, therefore, the offering brought on Pesach Rishon becomes insufficient. Since the passage of time has afforded us the opportunity of reaching greater heights in our divine service, it is necessary for us to bring another offering on Pesach Sheni.
Good. So we're saying that the message of Pesach Sheni, is for everyone, even one who did bring the offering. If you want to continue, you go ahead. Sure.
The necessity for constant spiritual striving is illustrated by reverence to the laws regulating spiritual ritual purity. There are several successive states of purity and impurity. For example, in ascending order, someone who is considered pure with regard to hulin, non-sacramental food, may be deemed impure with regard to the more stringent demands of Maser Sheni, the second tithe, which must be eaten in Jerusalem and only while in state of purity. By the same token, someone who is considered pure with regard to Maser Sheni must still be impure with regard to Truma, the portion of grain given to the Kohanim. Similarly, one who is pure in regard to Truma might still be impure for the purpose of partaking of the sacrifices offered in the Beis HaMikdash.
Okay, so in summary, what he's saying is, without going into explaining all of this, but there's a whole relative hierarchy. Purity is relative. So what's pure on a lower level is insufficient for the standard of yet a higher level. So that's what he's saying. Now continue. These categories are paralleled.
These categories are paralleled in our divine service. Though an individual may have been pure at his level of divine service on the 14th of Nisan, his progress since then renders his previous status unsatisfactory. Relative to his present level of attainment, his previous state is impure, and he is therefore obligated to bring a second Pesach offering.
So this explains why Pesach Sheni is observed by everybody. It's a holiday. What about the one who did bring the first time? The answer is, well, you don't have to bring literally a second offering a month later, but the message not to be satisfied with your achievements thus far remains. That
Rabbi,
gift continues. Yeah.
no, I'm just wondering, I appreciate the significance of it, but I'm wondering how it fits in with the whole notion that, I mean, if an individual is pure at the level of divine service on the 14th of Nisan, his progress since then is counting the Omer, which is a process of self-refinement. So how does he end up even, I mean, he should be more pure as time goes on than less pure. Why in the middle of everything is he required to make tshuva?
It's a very good question. So it seems that the answer is that Teshuvah again is radical. The message here is that even progress, but if it isn't radical and we're not really challenging ourselves, it's not enough. That's the message of Pesach Sheni. It calls to the tzaddik who is growing, who is this wonderful person that's working upon himself and advancing in their Yiddishkeit. And yet Pesach Sheni says, that's wonderful, but not enough, not enough. We are capable of dramatic and radical change. Now that doesn't mean changing our lifestyle. What it does mean simply is pushing the boundary of comfortability and really undertaking something that it's too much for me. I really can't, shouldn't, all the excuses, and still doing that's a Pesach Sheni growth. When we challenge the old order. Now you can't do that every single day because that'll drain and exhaust you, but it's one holiday in the year, and it's right there in the whole counting of the Omer model, significantly, that even in all of this, in your growth, is the message of, got to be crazy. It's got to be some passion and crazy and radical component to our relationship with God as well. There, at least mentioned once, embraced, and something to strive for from time to time, at least. Now, the chassid is always looking for that moment, striving for that moment, demanding of himself that moment. All is fine and good, but where's the Pesach Sheni in me? Where's the courage to make a real change, even in the good things, but something that breaks the mold. That takes courage, and that's the powerful message of Pesach Sheni. Kind of answered you. Yeah, okay. So let's continue. Let's conclude.
We find that a pattern of continuous growth, they shall proceed from strength to strength, is associated with appearing before God in Zion.
Which means Messianic year, Mashiach.
Motivated by Pesach Sheni, prepare us for the time when the Beis HaMikdash will be rebuilt, and we will partake of the Pesach offerings and the other festive offerings, and may this take place in the immediate future. Amen.
So he's saying that the truth is, this is our generation. Our generation is the Pesach Sheni generation overall. It's a generation that said, we want to be Jewish despite all the handicaps, despite all the questions, the obstacles, theological, Holocaust, assimilation, temptation, lack of education, all of the reasons and justification why we just should carry on the path that we were placed, which wasn't a bad one. We're still looking for change. We want to be connected. We don't want to be left out. We want to be connected in the deepest way. Our generation is the Pesach Sheni generation. And the challenge is to maintain that passion, that revolutionary spirit, and keep the fire going in all of our Yiddishkeit and all of our growth. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you, Rabbi, very much. Appreciate it.
A wonderful week.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Rabbi.
A
Shavuot tov.
wonderful,
Thank you for the
inspiring
bridge.
Pesach Sheni.
Have a good
Thank
night.
you. Oliver, thank you for the bridge you've built all across the world, from Australia to
Wow.
Canada.
Yeah, it's
Amen.
the bridges we're all building. Yeah, the bridges that transcend time and space.
Indeed.
From down
Thank you, Rabbi.
under
As
upward.
as we are doing in building this bridge to Michael. The most
Amen.
important Pesach holiday.
Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
God bless you, Rabbi. All
Thank
the
you.
best.
Good night.
All the best to the
Shabbat
Kama. God
shalom.
bless.
What of?
Oh, Terry, there you are. Didn't know you were on.
Sorry, we were out. Here's Julius.
Hi.
Hi.
Good morning.
And I realized that
Good night.
we were very late, but I wanted us to be able to say hello.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. Be
Thank
well
you.
and be well
Julius,
and have a great
you got
visit.
my email, Julius, yes?
I what?
You got my email?
Did you get his email?
On the class today?
No, on your site.
Yeah.
Oh yes, I did. I was just at the synagogue in Senegat, Rabbi Karlbach, for the Earth site this morning and last night.
Yeah.
We're living
So-
up north, so we're not really in Montreal in the last year.
He
I
knows.
know.
He knows.
So that's good. So your father should be, as I wrote to you, a good advocate on high for the whole family and only blessing. I really appreciate, you checking in now. Much appreciated.
I feel bad, but anyways, next week I did read it last night. The
Okay,
text.
so next week, God willing.
Be well. When do you move to Melbourne?
A week from Wednesday.
Another whole week. Oh my
Wow.
God, it's
Wow.
crazy.
Another 10 days.
Do you have to go back to Sydney after Melbourne again, or you go home?
There's no flights from, I gotta go back to Sydney, yeah. Just a stopover.
Oh, a stopover, okay. Okay.
And then you have to quarantine back in Montreal, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh well, it's worth it.
It's all worth it to see my parents, absolutely.
Yeah.
Shavua tov, Rabbi.
Shavua tov. Thanks for
Lord,
being
Mama.
everybody. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Bye bye.
Like this.